Picture this. 15,000 screaming fans, spotlights blazing, Elvis Presley in his prime, commanding the stage like a king. Then suddenly, complete silence. The king of rock and roll stops mid-song, walks to the edge of the stage, and extends his hand to a crying woman in the audience. What happened next would become one of the most heart-wrenching moments in music history, proving that beneath the glittering jumpsuit beat the heart of a man who understood real pain, real sacrifice, and the true meaning of honor. The year was 1975, and Elvis Presley was at the pinnacle of his Las Vegas reign. The International Hotel was packed to capacity with fans who had traveled from across the globe to witness the spectacle that was an Elvis concert. The atmosphere was electric, charged with the kind of energy that only the king could generate. Women threw scarves, men cheered wildly, and the air itself seemed to vibrate with pure excitement. But in the third row, something was different. Amidst the sea of ecstatic faces, one woman sat quietly, tears streaming down her cheeks. She wasn't crying from joy or excitement. These were tears of profound sorrow, the kind that come from a heart that's been shattered into a million pieces. Her name was Margaret Sullivan, and she was clutching a photograph of her husband, Staff Sergeant Robert Sullivan, who had been killed in action just 3 months earlier in Vietnam. Margaret had come to the concert not because she was a fan, but because it had been a promise she'd made to her husband before his final deployment. "When I get back," he had said, holding her close, "we'll see Elvis together. It'll be our celebration." Now she sat alone, fulfilling a promise to a ghost, surrounded by thousands of people but feeling utterly, completely alone. Elvis, ever the consummate performer, was in the middle of "Love Me Tender" when his eyes found hers. There was something about her stillness in the chaos, her tears in the midst of celebration, that stopped him cold. He had developed an almost supernatural ability to read his audience, to feel their energy and respond to their needs. But this was different. This was pain so raw, so real, that it cut through the theatrical magic of the moment like a knife. The king continued singing, but his eyes kept returning to Margaret. He could see she was holding something, a photograph, and the way she clutched it spoke volumes about loss and love. In that moment, Elvis Presley, the man who had everything money could buy, recognized something priceless, genuine human suffering. And he knew, with the certainty that comes from his own experiences with loss and heartbreak, that he had to do something about it. What happened next would be talked about for decades. Elvis Presley, in the middle of performing for 15,000 people, simply stopped singing. The band, confused but trained to follow their leader, gradually fell silent. The audience, sensing something extraordinary was happening, grew quiet with anticipation. In a matter of seconds, the cavernous showroom had transformed from a riot of sound into a cathedral of expectant silence. Elvis set down his microphone and walked slowly to the edge of the stage. His movements were deliberate, purposeful, stripped of the hip-shaking bravado that had made him famous. This wasn't Elvis the entertainer. This was Elvis the human being, responding to a call that transcended performance and entered the realm of genuine compassion. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed venue, "would you please come up here?" His tone was gentle, respectful, nothing like the playful banter he usually employed with audience members. Margaret looked around, confused and overwhelmed. Was he really talking to her? People began to whisper, necks craning to see who had captured the king's attention. Margaret shook her head, clutching the photograph tighter to her chest. She was dressed simply, in a black dress that seemed to absorb the stage lights rather than reflect them. She hadn't come to be part of a show. She had come to mourn, to remember, to keep a promise. But Elvis wasn't taking no for an answer. He descended from the stage, something he rarely did during a performance. Security moved to assist him, but he waved them off with a subtle gesture. This was personal now, a moment that belonged not to Elvis Presley the superstar, but to Elvis the man who had lost his beloved mother, who understood grief in its purest form. As he approached Margaret, the entire audience held its collective breath. Some people were crying now, sensing the profound emotion of the moment without fully understanding its source. Elvis knelt beside Margaret's seat, his famous jumpsuit pulling around him like the robes of a king offering comfort to his subjects. "What's his name?" Elvis asked softly, nodding toward the photograph. Margaret's voice was barely a whisper when she replied, "Robert. My husband Robert." The pain in those simple words was unmistakable, and Elvis felt it in his soul. He had spent his career making people feel good, making them forget their troubles for a few hours. But sometimes he realized the greatest gift wasn't helping people forget. It was helping them remember with honor and dignity. Elvis gently took Margaret's hands in his own, and for a moment, the king of rock and roll disappeared entirely. In his place sat a man who understood loss, who had experienced the devastating pain of saying goodbye to someone you love more than life itself. His mother Gladys had died when he was just 23, and the wound, though years old, still ached in moments like these. "Tell me about him," Elvis said, his voice barely audible to those nearby, but somehow carrying the weight of genuine interest and compassion. Margaret's tears flowed freely now, but she began to speak. She told him about Robert's laugh, about how he used to sing Elvis songs while shaving in the morning, about their plans to see Elvis together when he returned from Vietnam. She spoke about the night before he deployed, when they had danced in their kitchen to "Can't Help Falling in Love," both of them crying because they knew it might be goodbye. The audience, initially restless at the break in entertainment, had become completely absorbed in this intimate human drama unfolding before them. Many were crying now, moved by a display of genuine emotion that was far more powerful than any stage performance could ever be. They were witnessing something rare and beautiful, a superstar being simply, authentically human. Elvis listened to every word, his famous face etched with concentration and empathy. When Margaret finished speaking, he stood up slowly and helped her to her feet. "Would you honor me by joining me on stage?" he asked. "I think Robert would want you to hear his favorite song sung just for him." Margaret nodded, unable to speak. With Elvis's strong arm supporting her, she walked toward the stage as 15,000 people rose to their feet in spontaneous applause. It wasn't the wild, frenzied applause of a typical Elvis show. This was different, deeper, more meaningful. It was the sound of recognition, of respect for sacrifice, of appreciation for the profound gesture they were witnessing. As they reached the stage, Elvis helped Margaret up and positioned 2 chairs in the center, under the bright lights. He signaled to his band, and they began the gentle opening notes of "Are You Lonesome Tonight?" Robert's favorite Elvis song, Margaret had revealed. But this version would be different from any Elvis had ever performed. This would be sung not for adulation or applause, but for love, for memory, for a promise kept to a fallen soldier. Elvis sat beside Margaret and began to sing, his voice stripped of its usual theatrical flourishes, replaced instead with raw, honest emotion that seemed to come from the very depths of his being. What followed was perhaps the most moving performance of Elvis Presley's entire career. As he sang, "Are You Lonesome Tonight?" his voice carried none of its usual showmanship. Instead, it was filled with genuine emotion, with understanding of loss, with respect for sacrifice. He sang directly to Margaret, but his words seemed to reach every person in that room who had ever loved someone, ever lost someone, ever made a promise they struggled to keep. Margaret sat beside him, the photograph of Robert clutched in her hands, tears streaming down her face. But these weren't just tears of sadness anymore. They were tears of gratitude, of healing, of a promise finally fulfilled. She could almost feel Robert there with her, could almost hear his voice joining in with Elvis's, telling her it was okay to smile again, okay to let the music heal her broken heart. The audience was completely silent, except for the occasional sob or sniffle. Hardened men wept openly, thinking of their own losses, their own loved ones who had made the ultimate sacrifice. Women held their hands to their hearts, understanding Margaret's pain in a way that transcended words. Even the usually stoic security guards had tears in their eyes as they witnessed this extraordinary display of human compassion. When the song ended, Elvis gently took Margaret's hand and helped her stand. The silence in the room was profound, sacred almost. Then, slowly, one person began to clap. Then another. Soon, all 15,000 people were on their feet, applauding not just for Elvis, but for Margaret, for Robert, for the beautiful moment of humanity they had all been privileged to witness. Elvis embraced Margaret gently, whispering something in her ear that made her nod and smile through her tears. Later, she would tell reporters that he had said, "Robert's watching, honey, and he's proud. You kept your promise, and now you can start living again." With that, he escorted her back to her seat, but not before giving her one of his famous scarves, not thrown carelessly into a crowd, but placed carefully around her shoulders like a blessing. The rest of the concert continued, but everyone knew they had witnessed something extraordinary. Elvis performed with renewed energy, as if the act of comforting Margaret had recharged his own soul. The audience responded with unusual warmth and connection, understanding that they had all been part of something bigger than entertainment. They had been part of healing, part of honor, part of love's triumph over loss. That night, Margaret Sullivan went home carrying more than just memories of a concert. She carried with her the knowledge that her husband had been honored by the king himself, that their love had been witnessed and blessed by thousands of strangers who now understood something about sacrifice, about devotion, about the power of keeping promises to those we love. This wasn't just a concert moment. It was a testament to the man behind the legend. Elvis showed us that true greatness isn't measured in record sales or screaming fans, but in our capacity to see suffering and respond with love. Margaret's tears that night watered the seeds of healing, and Elvis's compassion helped them grow. Ready to discover more incredible stories of human compassion and legendary moments? Subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell, because every week we uncover the untold stories behind music's greatest legends that will restore your faith in humanity. Which artist's act of kindness should we explore next? Let us know in the comments below.